4 years have been erased from your life, but you can't remember a single second of that time. You don't know where you were, what happened to you, or why you were left in the middle of the freezing mountain forest. This is not just a story about a disappearance, this is a story about a return that raises more questions than the disappearance itself. 3 teenagers stepped into the White Mountains. 4 years later, one of them appears on the road. A hollow person. A boy with no name, no past. What happened to him, and the fate of the other 2, is a mystery that chills the blood. The most terrifying thing about this story is the silence. The silence of the mountains and forests, and the silence of the sole survivor. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On the morning of October 14, 2017, at 8:10 a.m., 15-year-old Evan Brooks left his home in Conway, New Hampshire, to join a pre-planned hiking trip with his 2 close friends, 16-year-old Caleb Rivers and 15-year-old Noah Kent. According to Evan's mother, who was preparing food for them to take along, all 3 were excited because this was the first time they were attempting a section of the old bridle path in Franconia Notch State Park, part of the White Mountains Range. Evan wore a light jacket, trekking pants, and carried a small backpack with water and snacks. The group was driven in Caleb's car to the parking area near the trailhead. At approximately 9:22 a.m., security camera footage at the Lafayette Place campground store captured the 3 teenagers buying additional water and a paper map before leaving the store. An independent hiker reported that shortly after 10 a.m., he saw the group briefly talking at a fork in the trail before turning onto a lesser-used side path instead of continuing along the main route as described on the map. From early afternoon, thick clouds covered the mountainside and wind speed increased rapidly, causing the light to fade much faster than the weather forecast had predicted. By around 4:30 p.m., the families had not received the planned update text messages but were not immediately worried, as many trails in the White Mountains frequently lose cell service. However, by nearly 7 p.m., all 3 families were unable to reach them. Calls only rang before losing signal. Around 9:45 p.m., Caleb's father drove to the parking lot and found his son's car still parked in the same spot from the morning, with no sign that the group had returned, while it was now fully dark and temperatures were dropping quickly. After the families made several more unsuccessful attempts to contact them, they agreed to report the situation to authorities at 10:58 p.m., officially opening a missing persons case for the 3 teenagers in the White Mountains. Upon receiving the report, the search and rescue team from Franconia Notch State Park, in coordination with New Hampshire Fish and Game, immediately activated the SAR protocol on the first night, deploying rangers to the trailhead area and establishing a temporary staging point to coordinate operations. The old bridle path was prioritized for initial sweeping since it was the route the teenagers had registered, with rangers using high-powered lights and handheld thermal imaging devices to search for body heat signatures within direct line of sight. A second team simultaneously approached the Falling Waters Trail to ensure all major forks were checked in the shortest possible time. In parallel with ground operations, the county's drone team deployed 2 units along the western ridgeline, using infrared cameras to scan depressions in the terrain, rock crevices, and open forest areas where human body heat could be detected from above. However, the drone monitors recorded no heat signatures other than scattered wildlife in the area. Rangers reported that environmental conditions deteriorated rapidly. Strong upslope winds caused constant surface temperature fluctuations, low clouds and thick fog severely reduced visibility, and slippery rocky terrain under early-season fallen leaves forced the search teams to move much more slowly than anticipated. Many trail sections had their tracks blurred by wind, making it difficult to follow the group's direction of travel, especially on unmarked side paths. By dawn, After hours of continuous sweeping, the entire priority area around the trailhead and along the main route showed no signs of survival, response calls, or evidence indicating the group had returned to the area or suffered an accident within the initial search radius. With no heat signals detected and no emergency indicators found within nighttime accessible range, the SR command team was forced to conclude the first phase of the search and prepare an expanded plan for daylight. As soon as the first light of morning hit the White Mountains, the command team immediately launched the second search phase with reinforced personnel from New Hampshire Fish and Game and Franconia Notch Rangers, focusing on re-sweeping the entire area near the trailhead and expanding beyond the main trail boundaries. At around 6:40 a.m., a member of the Northern Search Team discovered a single glove lying well off the path, about half a mile from the old bridle path entrance. The glove showed no significant tearing or heavy soiling, suggesting it had been dropped recently, and its color and size matched the type of gear the three teenagers were likely carrying. The SR team leader marked the location with GPS, photographed the scene, and ordered an expanded search in the direction indicated by the glove, as it was highly probable the group had left the main trail from this area. A few hundred meters farther along the slope, another team found a water bottle under fallen leaves. The cap was still tightly closed, but the bottle body had minor scratches, indicating it had been dragged or dropped during movement. The bottle matched the brand sold at the Lafayette Place campground store, where the three had made purchases before entering the trail. The fact that both items appeared along the same off-route direction prompted the SR team to revise their initial assumptions and expand the search in an elliptical pattern, concentrating on the dense forest connecting the old bridle path to unofficial off-trail areas. To more accurately determine the direction of travel of the missing group, SR deployed a K9 team with 2 search dogs trained on the personal scent items of Evan and Caleb. As soon as they were released on lead, one dog reacted strongly and pulled toward the northeast, crossing rough terrain toward thick vegetation. The K9 maintained the trail for nearly 300 meters before suddenly losing the scent in an area of soft ground next to a pine stand, where wind direction shifted sharply and the ground showed unusual compression, as if something heavy had moved across it or multiple footsteps had pressed down in a short time. The SR team recorded this position on the search map, measured the compressed area, and noted that the weight distribution pattern did not match typical hiker travel routes, especially since the area lay entirely outside public trail maps. The sudden loss of scent by the K9, combined with the sequential discovery of 2 items in the same direction, provided solid grounds for the SR command to conclude that the teenagers had left the main trail in an unmarked direction and may have been led or forced to move off the official route. The search perimeter was expanded nearly 1 additional mile in the east, northeast and southeast directions, focusing on areas with abrupt terrain changes while prioritizing compressed ground sites as potential key indicators of abnormal movement by the missing group in their final hours before complete loss of contact. Immediately after confirming the first 2 items were off the main route, the SR command shifted to collecting and analyzing all retrievable movement data from the 3 teenagers to reconstruct their path in the hours before disappearance. Families provided information about personal devices each boy carried. Evan and Caleb each had a smartphone, while Noah wore a sports watch capable of recording steps and estimating distance. Technical specialists from New Hampshire Fish and Game requested the carrier to extract the last ping data from towers near Franconia Notch and accessed automatically synced GPS logs prior to complete signal loss. Although the mountainous area had dead zones, the data still allowed determination of the last updated positions of the 2 phones in late morning, consistent with the time the group was captured on camera at the Lafayette Place campground store. When cross-referenced with the step activity logs from Noah's watch, analysts observed that speed and step count for the approximately 45 minutes after leaving the store, aligned with a group walking on moderately sloped trail. However, when comparing estimated distance to actual time, the system recorded a nearly 41-minute gap with no corresponding step increase, an inconsistency with continuous movement on sloped terrain. This gap was especially notable because it occurred right after the witness saw the group talking at the fork and turning onto the side path. Investigators re-extracted the store camera footage to confirm the exact time the group left the purchase point, then created a projected movement map based on prior average speed combined with terrain. After constructing the expected route map, the analysis team determined that if the group had followed the original plan, they would have continued northwest along the old bridle path, with no natural reason or terrain feature to cause the three teenagers to turn northeast onto a little-known side path. Cross-referencing GPS data, signal loss timing, and witness reports, the analysis team identified the last reliably confirmed point where both technical systems and direct observation aligned. The area near the intersection of the early section of Old Bridle Path and the small turnoff leading into dense forest. From this point, the projected map assumed continued travel along the main route, but the discovery of the glove and water bottle in an off-route area revealed a completely different trajectory. GIS specialists built a three-dimensional terrain model marking potential points that could force a trail departure, such as fallen trees, steep drops, or cross-flowing streams. But on-site field checks found no conditions severe enough to force an abrupt direction change. As natural factors were progressively ruled out, the team focused on the possibility of external influence on the group's direction. Data from NOAA's watch showed the group had paused for a significant period near the turnoff area before step signals resumed in a direction inconsistent with the main route. When simulating the movement map based on discovered evidence, analysts observed that the group's actual path deviated 30 to 40 degrees from the usual trail route, something unlikely if all three clearly understood the intended direction and remained in active control. The blank period in the device log, the mismatch between expected and actual distance, and the real direction leading into unmarked forest formed a consistent chain of data indicating that the decision to leave the main trail was not random. The final cross-referenced mapping, combined with witness statements and valid GPS points, allowed the analysis team to make a preliminary determination. The possibility must be considered that the teenagers were influenced by an external factor that caused them to change direction, leading them to depart from the planned route and enter dense forest where search efforts became significantly more difficult, and the risk of losing the trail increased substantially. After the route analysts completed their device data cross-check and established the likelihood that the teenagers had left the planned path under unclear external influence, the SAR team, supported by New Hampshire Fish and Game, began a detailed sweep of the area where the K9 had lost the scent in the previous search phase. At the edge of a thick vegetation patch, rangers discovered a section of soft ground showing signs of straight-line dragging nearly 2 meters long. The surface was disturbed in a wide streak, unlike natural slip marks from a hiker falling. The drag pattern featured parallel deep grooves, while typical foot slip marks create scattered, irregular channels. The on-scene team leader used a probe to measure soil compression and recorded strong force application toward the northeast, consistent with the direction of the previously discovered glove and water bottle. When expanding the inspection area around the drag mark, a ranger found a severed plastic drawstring cord under decomposing leaves. The cut end showed a clean, sharp, straight severance consistent with a metal blade tool, rather than fraying, tension breakage, or animal chewing. The presence of an item cleanly cut by a sharp tool in an area with no natural reason for hikers to use drawstrings further heightened suspicion of human intervention. Not far away, beneath fallen pine needles, was a fairly clear boot print on damp soil, significantly larger in size than the shoe sizes provided by the families for Evan, Caleb, and Noah. Footwear specialists identified the print as approximately size 11 or 11.5, while all three teenagers wore sizes ranging from 8 to 9.5. The print showed weight distribution concentrated toward the heel, indicating the wearer stood stationary or moved slowly for a short time. The boot print also did not match any footwear worn by SAR members, all of whom used documented specialized soles recorded in the scene control list. As strong winds blew away some of the covering leaves, rangers recorded 2 additional faint boot prints several dozen centimeters away, forming a cluster suggesting a standing position rather than passing through, indicating an adult had paused to observe or perform some action in the area. There were no unusually deep prints to suggest one of the teenagers might have worn oversized shoes or swapped footwear with someone. The presence of boot prints not belonging to the missing group, or the rescue personnel at that time, indicated someone else had been present at the evidence discovery location. After confirming the drag marks, severed cord and foreign boot prints, the SAR team expanded the search deeper into the northeast dense forest, to determine if any natural accident could explain the chain of evidence just found. However, the entire adjacent area showed no signs of steep slips, rolling rocks, fallen trees or unusual environmental factors that could have forced the 3 teenagers off the trail and caused them to fall or injure themselves. The terrain was uneven, but lacked any point hazardous enough to produce the deep drag marks recorded. The Terrain Safety Assessment Team confirmed no landslides, no evidence of fast-flowing water creating drag force, and no proof the group had to avoid wildlife or unusual natural phenomena. The complete absence of accident indicators, combined with evidence of tool intervention and foreign boot prints, led the SAR Command and New Hampshire State Police representatives to consider human involvement behind the disappearance. At this point, the scene report was prepared according to standards for a complex missing persons case rather than a straightforward lost hiker situation. Data from the earlier route analysis phase showed the teenagers had departed the main route in an inexplicable direction, and the new on-site findings reinforced that the turnoff did not originate from natural causes. When synthesizing information from the 3 search phases, scattered evidence items, drag marks and foreign boot prints, the investigation team concluded that the case could no longer be handled as an ordinary accident or missing hiker incident. At the conclusion of that morning's sweep phase, the SAR Command representative officially reclassified the incident from hiker loss to suspicious disappearance, enabling deeper involvement by investigators from the New Hampshire State Police and opening an entirely different approach to the disappearance of the 3 teenagers in the White Mountains. Immediately after the case was classified as a suspicious disappearance, the New Hampshire State Police, in coordination with special operations units from Fish and Game, expanded the investigation with a focus on searching for signs of human intervention. They concentrated on thoroughly checking all cabins, wooden shelters, temporary lean-tos, old tents, and abandoned bunkers scattered throughout the White Mountains area. Experienced local rangers guided specialized teams, inspecting more than 30 structures abandoned since the 1980s that had previously been used by hunters or backpackers. But none showed signs of recent habitation, cooking evidence, personal items, or any indication related to the 3 teenagers. Next, the investigative team launched a public tip intake campaign, collecting over 300 leads in the first 6 months, including reports of strangers appearing near trails, unusual noises in the forest, suspicious online accounts, and cases of hikers who had been approached strangely in the Franconia Notch area. However, upon verification of each lead, most were ruled out. Many reports were based on unfounded speculation. Others coincided with the activities of tourists or forest maintenance crews, and none led to additional physical evidence or valuable scene discoveries. Meanwhile, terrain survey teams continued checking unofficial secondary routes, including seasonal paths used by locals, wildlife trails, and steep hazardous slopes that could have become unintended travel paths. These areas were grid-searched to ensure no physical traces were missed, such as torn clothing, food packaging, scratch marks, or personal items, but throughout months of expanded scope, no new evidence directly connected to the 3 teenagers was found. Due to the lack of visible traces, the State Police Behavioral Analysis Unit was brought in to establish a risk profile based on the circumstances of the disappearance, the ages and personalities of the teenagers, terrain characteristics, and existing investigative data. The assessment report concluded that voluntarily leaving the trail in an uncontrolled manner did not fit the pattern of a natural accident, while the discovery of unfamiliar shoe prints and cut items indicated the likely involvement of an adult familiar with the terrain, acting with intent, and capable of leading the group of teenagers away from the main route without creating obvious signs of chaos. However, due to insufficient additional data to narrow down suspects or identify means of transportation, the report remained at the level of establishing risk and could not point to a specific individual. In parallel, the investigative team reviewed lists of individuals who had been present in or resided around the Franconia Notch area, including those with prior convictions for assault, unlawful restraint, or other signs of social deviance, but no one matched the required timing and location of the incident. After 8 months of multi-directional investigative efforts with no breakthrough, the team had to reassess the entire process and conclude that no further proactive investigative actions could be taken without duplicating previous efforts. In the final review meeting, state police representatives decided to transfer the case file to the cold case unit for continued monitoring, but without large-scale active investigation. From that point, the case was frozen in the status of unsolved under periodic review, meaning it would only be reactivated upon the emergence of new evidence or new witnesses. Nevertheless, the families of Evan, Caleb, and Noah continued to organize small seasonal search efforts, gathering friends and local residents to walk secondary trails, check rock crevices and mountain gaps in areas they suspected. The New Hampshire hiking community also assisted by sharing information, posting search notices on forums, and reporting any findings, no matter how small. Over time, the frequency of searches gradually decreased, but never completely stopped. Each year in the fall, the families still returned to Franconia Notch to quietly seek answers. While the official case file was passed between new investigators in the cold case unit without any further leads to break the long-standing impasse. Nearly 3 years after the case was transferred to the cold case unit, and with no new traces emerging, on a cold early November morning, with temperatures nearing freezing, the duty ranger at the Lincoln Woods Station, located on the eastern edge of the White Mountains, recorded the appearance of a teenager staggering out of the forest area behind the station. He was wearing torn clothing, thin fabric, unsuitable for the weather, bare feet caked in mud, and showed severe disorientation. The ranger immediately approached, conducted an initial assessment, and called for medical support upon noticing the boy was in a state of exhaustion, with low body temperature and slow responses to basic questions. After being wrapped in blankets to stay warm and brought into the station's first aid room, the teenager could only speak a few disjointed words and was unable to provide his name, address, or any consistent information about his situation. The ranger immediately reported to the emergency system and coordinated with local medical teams to transport him to the nearest hospital in Lincoln for comprehensive evaluation. At the hospital, the medical team initiated the identification process using biometric data, fingerprint scanning, matching of identifying features, and comparison with the state's missing persons database, and quickly confirmed an almost perfect match with the record of Evan Brooks, the teenager who had disappeared along with Caleb and Noah nearly 4 years earlier at Franconia Notch State Park. After a second verification using hair samples and biological markers, the hospital immediately notified the state police and contacted Evan's family based on stored information. Once identity was confirmed, the medical team, together with state police forensic specialists, began a comprehensive evaluation sequence to determine the extent of injury and biological traces related to the period Evan was missing. This began with a clinical examination documenting severe physical deterioration, BMI reduced by nearly 30%, prolonged nutritional deficiency, and blood indices showing chronic vitamin D deficiency and anemia. Nutrition specialists assessed that such severely low vitamin D levels could only occur if the patient had lived in an environment with little to no sunlight exposure for an extended period. X-rays revealed 2 sites of previously healed non-displaced rib fractures with slight axial misalignment, indicating injury occurred approximately 2 to 3 years before Evan was found, with healing occurring naturally without medical treatment. Additionally, the right ankle showed an old spiral fracture characteristic of twisting force injury, commonly seen in confined spaces or unstable movement. Doctors found no evidence of severe intestinal parasitic infection, an unusual finding, as prolonged wilderness survival would carry high risk of parasites or contaminated water. The complete absence of such agents indicated he had not lived in an open wilderness environment. On Evan's skin, the general examination noted numerous faded old impressions around the wrists and ankles, continuous circular patterns with symmetrical distribution, matching marks typically seen from prolonged application of restraints or securing bands with moderate pressure. Small, repeated scars around the ankles and forearms of varying ages, some over 2 years old. Others only a few months suggested repeated cycles of binding and release. Additionally, both shoulders and the upper back showed signs of call-used skin and old minor bruising consistent with sitting or leaning against hard surfaces without cushioning support. Under blue light examination, doctors observed recurrent friction spots on the inner forearms and behind the knees, indicating prolonged time spent in a low-ceiling confined space, possibly requiring a crouched posture or movement within a very limited area. Hair analysis revealed irregular growth cycles, indicating nutrition was sporadically supplemented at minimally sufficient levels, but inconsistent with an environment dependent on external provision by another person. When cross-referencing all clinical findings with the nearly 4-year timeline of disappearance, the medical team concluded that the injuries and biological signs followed a logical sequence: severe malnutrition in the first 2 years, followed by a phase of minimal but restricted nutritional maintenance, evident in hair and mineral levels. Ankle and rib injuries aligned with a period when Evan was presumably unable to move freely. Prolonged vitamin D depletion could only form if he lived in a dark enclosed or subterranean structure for extended periods. Based on these findings, the forensic team completely ruled out the possibility of Evan surviving independently in nature, as there were no characteristic signs of long-term wilderness living such as cold exposure, injuries, insect bite scars, infections from natural water sources, or long scratches from dense forest travel. Instead, all evidence pointed to him living under controlled conditions, with limited light exposure, restricted freedom of movement, and dependence on another individual for food and water. After synthesizing test results, X-ray images, dermatological records, and nutritional assessment, the medical team reached a unified conclusion: Evan had undergone systematic, prolonged, and actively controlled confinement by another person. The injury patterns were incompatible with any scenario involving natural accident survival, long-term disorientation, or spontaneous sheltering in the natural environment. The final medical report was forwarded to the state police, stating clearly, based on clinical signs, laboratory samples, and comprehensive analysis, the patient could not have sustained life over the past 4 years without active intervention from another individual, and has endured prolonged periods of restricted movement and environmental exposure. This determination became the official basis for the state police to elevate the case from suspicious disappearance to a criminal investigation involving kidnapping and false imprisonment, requiring transfer of all data to the Major Crimes Investigative Unit and initiating an in-depth analysis phase regarding the origin of the confinement location and any individual capable of directly maintaining control over Evan throughout the 4 years he was missing. After the medical team completed clinical evaluations and transferred the report to the state police, the forensic psychology unit was deployed to conduct a series of non-confrontational interviews with Evan, to assess the extent of psychological trauma and the degree to which he may have been influenced by prolonged behavior control techniques. The first session was conducted in a soundproof medical room with minimal personnel present to avoid creating pressure. The psychologist used open-ended questioning, not requiring Evan to describe specific events, but instead focusing on observing physical reactions, eye contact, posture, and ability to maintain interaction. In the very first minutes, the specialist noted pronounced avoidance behaviors when Evan was asked about experiences related to confined spaces or the nearly 4-year period he was missing. He frequently lowered his head, turned away from bright light sources, and clenched his hands tightly whenever unexpected sounds came from the hallway. These responses were identified as conditioned fear reflexes, not immediate reactions to a short-term event, but the result of repeated exposure to an anxiety-inducing environment over a long period. When the specialist shifted to questions assessing autonomy, Evan consistently gave short, sometimes identically structured answers as though they had been pre-learned. Meaningless reassuring phrases, such as "it's okay" or "I'm fine," appeared even when the question content was unrelated to emotional state. The repetitive nature and formulaic manner of responding led the analysis team to conclude that he had undergone a period of behavioral conditioning, essentially programming through enforced rules in the confinement environment. When asked to describe feelings associated with being alone or locked in a small space, Evan reacted by curling up, avoiding eye contact, and staring at the floor for extended periods. Specialists noted increased breathing rate, accompanied by slight hand tremors, but Evan was unable to verbally explain what caused his fear. This supported the hypothesis that his emotional responses stemmed not from retrievable memories, but from repeated experiences in tightly controlled situations that formed unconscious protective reflexes. In deeper evaluation stages, the specialist employed indirect interviewing, asking about time, light, sounds, and daily routines. When asked what made him feel safe, Evan often responded with vague keywords, such as quiet, don't move, sit still, or don't do wrong. These answers indicated he had become accustomed to an environment where remaining still or absolute compliance was the condition for avoiding punishment or mental pressure. Conversely, when asked what frightened him, Evan tended not to answer, only shaking his head or looking toward the door, an associative response linked to experiences of being monitored or controlled by another person. The psychology team cross-referenced these manifestations with medical records to determine consistency. Severe vitamin D deficiency, wrist scars, bone injuries from confined spaces, and irregular nutritional cycles provided strong grounds to assume Evan had been isolated in a dark, movement-restricted environment, while his psychological responses indicated enforced coercive discipline. Considering overall behavior, the analysis team proposed that the captor had employed an isolation, control, brainwashing model documented in long-term captivity cases. Signs of behavioral programming were evident in Evan's repeated responses. Avoidance of personal responsibility, unusual wariness toward strangers, and tendency to watch the door as though awaiting reaction from an authority figure. All these factors indicated systematic psychological control. In subsequent interviews, the specialist observed moments when Evan seemed about to reveal something but immediately stopped, as though part of him remained under invisible fear. During those instances, his heart rate increased slightly, and he used his hand to cover the right side of his neck, where medical records had previously noted an unexplained call-used patch. These protective behaviors further reinforced the conclusion that he had been placed in a state of constant vigilance regarding another person's reactions. After compiling all evaluation sessions, the expert team concluded that the level of psychological disorder Evan exhibited could not have developed from merely getting lost or self-concealment. Instead, it perfectly matched the profile of a victim controlled by an adult capable of maintaining an isolated environment, imposing rules, conditioning him through reward, punishment, and keeping him in prolonged dependency. The final report from the forensic psychology unit determined that Evan had not only suffered physical confinement, but also deep psychological impact, producing reflexes and behaviors characteristic of a manipulated victim, thereby confirming the organized criminal element of the case. In the next phase of the evaluation process, as Evan began to be able to communicate at a limited level, the investigative team, in coordination with a psychologist, employed the sensory memory retrieval method, focusing on elements Evan could recall without directly describing the experience or the identity of his captor. The questions were designed around sounds, smells, sensations of temperature and humidity in the environment where he had been held, with the goal of identifying the physical characteristics of the confinement space. Evan described frequently hearing a sound similar to continuous flowing water, not loud, but steady, sometimes echoing as if from a narrow passage, suggesting a water source might be nearby, but blocked by a wall or partition. He also noted occasional light metallic clinking sounds occurring in cycles, sometimes accompanied by slight vibrations under the floor, providing grounds for the possibility of mechanical structures such as water pipes, valves, or simple metal devices. When asked about environmental sensations, Evans stated that the place where he was held was mostly cooler in temperature than the outside climate, with high humidity, and the contact surfaces were often cold, slippery, or covered with condensation. These descriptions led the analysis team to rule out the possibility of him being held in a cabin or wooden house, as the temperature and humidity in such spaces could not be maintained at consistently low levels year-round unless located deep underground or near a strong flowing water source. The smell in the space was also described by Evan as occasionally having a machine oil odor, a faint gas smell, and at times a rotten wood smell, indicating a structure combining metal and wood materials, most likely a homemade or abandoned construction that had been repurposed. When cross-referencing these descriptions with terrain data, the state police geological specialists proposed analysis based on 3 factors: elevation, underground mapping, and locations of natural watercourses. Using GIS, they mapped the entire area from Franconia Notch northward, focusing on valleys and mountain ranges where granite and schist intersect, areas that commonly feature underground fissures carrying water or small subterranean streams. By delineating zones with naturally high humidity, the analysis team identified the area between North Kinsman and Cannon Mountain as having a higher density of underground springs compared to other locations, along with numerous patches of ground previously recorded as unstable due to subsurface erosion. These factors made the area a strong candidate, matching Evans' descriptions of faint echoing water and cold, damp surfaces. Additionally, local meteorological data indicated that the region between these 2 peaks consistently maintained temperatures 2–4 degrees lower than surrounding areas due to elevation and dense forest canopy, aligning with Evans' temperature perceptions. The GIS team then overlaid geological maps onto the routes previously searched by the SAR team, cross-referencing with areas that had been inaccessible due to steep slopes or thick vegetation. The narrow valley area below the eastern slope of North Kinsman was assessed as having potential for small man-made structures such as old mining tunnels, temporary logging shelters, or shallow caves formed by natural erosion. Evans' mention of metallic sounds also prompted the engineering team to consider the possibility of old water or gas pipes from infrastructure dating back many decades, or 2 metal objects hung or placed within an enclosed space. Both scenarios were plausible, given the area's history of logging and temporary construction activity. Beyond water and metal elements, Evans' descriptions of humidity and hard, cold surfaces directed the investigation toward locations likely to be underground or semi-underground structures, such as homemade bunkers, temporary cellars, or crudely dug storage pits. Such constructions commonly appear in areas with thick, easily excavated soil, which matches the geology of the eastern slope of North Kinsman, rich in fine soil overlying bedrock. By integrating all data layers, sensory descriptions, geological maps, underground watercourses, and high humidity zones. The GIS team identified the highest probability area as lying between two key terrain intersection points, the northeastern slope of North Kinsman and the western edge of Cannon Mountain, forming a mid-elevation zone, far from popular trails and difficult to detect with standard drone sweeps due to thick forest canopy coverage. The final delineated map was presented to the investigative team with the note that all elements Evan described, echoing water, high humidity, oil smell, cold surfaces, and metallic sounds, converged logically in this area where underground terrain, small water sources, and the potential presence of old concealed structures coexist. Narrowing the search area to the forested band between North Kinsman and Cannon Mountain provided investigators with a clear direction instead of searching the vast White Mountains, while laying the groundwork for an in-depth ground survey phase, requiring close coordination among geological teams, rangers, and crime investigators experienced with underground structures. After the suspected area was narrowed to the forested band between North Kinsman and Cannon Mountain, the investigative team, together with the technical support group, began the ground survey phase to confirm whether the area contained underground structures or anomalies consistent with Evan's sensory descriptions. Due to steep terrain and dense vegetative cover making direct access difficult, the technical team deployed drones equipped with infrared cameras and multispectral sensors to scan the entire surface from above. In morning scan frames, the analysis system detected an area of vegetation with noticeably different leaf density and color tones compared to surrounding regions. Trees were sparser, and some low shrubs showed signs of altered groundwater or soil disturbance. Under thermal imaging, this area exhibited slower heat retention as the sun rose, suggesting the possibility of a subsurface void or different material beneath impeding natural heat absorption. The drone continued cross-angle sweeps and identified an elliptical patch several meters wide with smooth soil surface and uneven light reflection, distinct from the typical granite and root-covered ground in the region. This prompted the technical team to mark the area as a likely human-impacted site. Once the suspected void was delineated on the map, the ground survey team transported ground-penetrating radar (GPR) equipment to the nearest accessible point, then split into small groups to approach the area on foot. The steep terrain, numerous tree roots, and thick leaf litter slowed movement and required constant marking of routes to avoid falling into natural steep gullies. Upon reaching sufficient proximity, they deployed GPR by establishing a rectangular measurement grid, dragging the equipment along parallel lines to observe subsurface density changes. Initial GPR results displayed anomalies at depths of approximately 1.5 to 2 meters, a heterogeneous reflection zone forming a cavity with unnaturally straight edges and flatter surfaces than those of natural caves or rock fissures. The GPR data analysis team noted consistent boundaries, gentle curves, and reflection patterns indicating the presence of man-made materials, most likely wood, metal, or a combination. When overlaid onto geological maps, specialists confirmed that the area naturally lacks large caves or significant underground water flows capable of creating such regularly shaped voids. The bedrock beneath North Kinsman and Cannon Mountain consists primarily of granite and schist, which rarely form natural cavities except under extreme erosion conditions not present at the measured depths. Review of historical geological logs and land use maps from the 1950s, 1980s also revealed no record of any permitted construction in this zone, further supporting the conclusion that the cavity originated from individual activity or spontaneous construction. Based on this data, the investigative team concluded that the anomalous vegetation zone, irregular GPR reflections, and geometrically consistent cavity constituted the strongest evidence of a likely man-made underground structure consistent with Evan's sensory descriptions. To avoid collapse risks or scene contamination, State police requested deployment of the Terrain Special Task Force, including experts in difficult access operations, underground safety, and structural analysis. This team first conducted a peripheral survey, assessing surface soil stability, tree root depth, evidence of past soil excavation, and natural escape routes in case of cavity entry. They established 3 hypothetical safe access points, selecting the one with the lowest risk, based on surface gradient and soil stability. This point was chosen for setting up safety lines, anchor bolts, and a narrow access corridor to ensure the survey team could reach the central area without directly disturbing the cavity surface. In parallel with physical preparation, the technical team continued drone sweeps at different times of day to record temperature and surface reflectivity changes, thereby confirming the suspected area's anomalous characteristics were stable and not the result of temporary phenomena, such as animal burrows or natural soil hollows. Evening scans also showed the vegetation above the cavity remaining cooler than surrounding areas, consistent with the hypothesis of a larger than normal subsurface space, lacking normal light and heat exposure. With all data aligning, vegetation deviation, man-made cavity, absence of recorded construction history, and anomalous thermal response, the Terrain Special Task Force completed formal access zone setup. The final report to the investigation commander stated that the area likely contained a human-built or modified structure of sufficient size for a person to live inside, and consistent with the full set of sensory clues provided by Evan. This establishment of a high-probability location became the basis for the investigative team's decision on the next step: direct entry to verify the nature of the cavity and collect physical evidence potentially related to the 3 missing teenagers' period of disappearance. Once the Terrain Special Task Force completed the safe access corridor setup and confirmed low surface collapse risk, the technical team began carefully removing the overlying soil above the suspected cavity using hand tools to avoid strong vibrations. The initial layer consisted mainly of decayed leaves and tree roots, but within minutes the rangers discovered a square horizontal wooden beam that was not a natural root. As more surrounding soil was cleared, the top surface of a wooden trapdoor emerged, its edges reinforced with rusted metal bars. The trapdoor had hinges on the south side, with its exterior covered in soil and thick moss, indicating long-term camouflage. The technical team checked structural stability using vibration sensors and deployed gas monitoring equipment to ensure no toxic gas concentrations exceeded safe levels inside. After initial safety clearance, they attached support lines to the hinges and slowly lifted the trapdoor. A cold, damp airflow escaped from below, matching Evan's earlier sensory description. Beneath was a crude wooden ladder descent, approximately 3 meters deep, leading into near-total darkness. High-powered flashlights were activated, revealing a compacted hardened dirt floor, forming a flat surface contrasting sharply with the natural geology outside. After safety equipment confirmed sufficient oxygen levels, the survey team entered in a 2x2 formation to ensure support if the floor weakened. The interior space was larger than anticipated, approximately 10-12 square meters, with ceiling height sufficient for an adult to sit upright but not stand fully. The walls consisted of a combination of compacted earth and old wooden planks braced from inside to prevent collapse. Friction marks on the wood surfaces indicated the structure had been used and modified multiple times. Inside the chamber, the survey team documented numerous items: a low, crudely built wooden bed, a worn old blanket, several empty food cans stacked to one side, a large plastic water jug, rope fragments, and a small metal box containing tools. Along the west wall were 2 metal rings bolted securely into the wooden support at wrist height when seated. This location showed clear wear marks, indicating prolonged repeated friction from a moving object. Below the rings on the floor, an area of unusually compacted soil formed small grooves consistent with long-term restraint in a fixed position. Along the east wall, the team discovered a series of carved notches, marked either by days or counts, irregular but patterned. Some were long, some short, grouped in clusters, most likely a timekeeping system used by the occupants to track passing days. Closer inspection revealed varying depths among clusters, suggesting creation by different people or at different times. While collecting biological samples from the wooden bed area, the technical team found small fabric fibers, hair and skin cells on the surface. DNA samples were collected from multiple locations throughout the chamber, including the bed, blanket, metal rings, food cans, and wall surfaces. Rapid on-site mobile device analysis identified at least 3 distinct DNA sources, one confirmed to match Evans' record. The remaining 2 showed characteristics consistent with male adolescents, providing grounds to suspect Caleb and Noah had also been present in this space. Additionally, in the left corner of the chamber, the team found a torn piece of fabric with a pattern matching clothing previously provided in photos by Noah's family. Dust and soil accumulation indicated the item had been there for many years, not a recent trace. Another noted detail was the significantly lower temperature inside the chamber compared to the exterior, high humidity, and unnaturally hardened floor soil, evidencing repeated human compaction over time. These factors, combined with the shackle rings and metal wear marks, indicated this was not a temporary shelter, but a deliberately maintained long-term confinement environment. Investigators continued checking less immediately visible locations for additional physical evidence. Near the south wall base, they found a decayed paper fragment with faint, barely legible writing, possibly initials or symbols. In a dark corner, beneath compacted soil, the team discovered a small upward shaft, likely a homemade ventilation pipe, explaining Evans' mention of faint airflow. This manual ventilation system reinforced the hypothesis that the chamber was deliberately constructed, sufficient to sustain life, while severely restricting movement and light exposure. Overall, structural inspection revealed multiple repair phases, some newer wooden planks, others rotted and reinforced. This indicated periodic access and maintenance by the user over an extended period. Specialists confirmed no signs of wild animal intrusion. Surfaces were cleaner than natural conditions would allow, proving minimal ongoing maintenance. Based on all findings, metal rings, bed, time-marking notches, multiple source DNA, aged items, and sealed structure. The investigative team concluded that this chamber was the site of prolonged captivity, fully matching Evans' skeletal injuries, light deprivation, and psychological presentation. The chamber not only contained traces of presence, but reflected a forced living process over many years, thereby confirming it as a systematic confinement location central to the disappearance of the 3 teenagers. Right after confirming that the underground bunker was the site of prolonged detention and obtaining DNA evidence from the 3 teenagers, the investigation team expanded the survey radius to an area of 300–500 meters around the site, based on the assumption that any additional traces related to the condition of Caleb and Noah would likely be located nearby, as the steep terrain and dense forest limited the possibility of moving bodies or evidence far away. The Terrain Task Force established 3 concentric search rings, each approximately 100 meters apart, mobilizing specialized geology teams, K9 cadaver dogs, and a mobile forensic unit to conduct ground-penetrating radar scans. The initial phase of the search yielded no clear signs, however. Near the end of the second ring, a technician detected an area of differential soil compaction, unusually flat ground surface, and leaf litter covering the top with inconsistent thickness compared to the surrounding natural area. Upon closer inspection, the sweep team observed that the top layer of leaves and soil had been disturbed within an elliptical area, approximately 1.2 meters wide, indicating the spot had been dug up and refilled sometime within the past few years. K9 units were brought in and immediately reacted strongly, repeatedly scratching at a point near the center of the ellipse, reinforcing the suspicion that this could be a burial site containing human-related objects. The forensic team marked the location and initiated a careful manual excavation protocol to preserve the natural soil structure. After approximately 20 minutes of removing the topsoil, specialists discovered signs of decayed fabric material and small bone fragments, confirming this as the site where detailed exhumation should begin. The process continued until the entire upper body of a teenage corpse was exposed. The clothing was torn, but the colors and fabric remained recognizable and consistent with the outfit Noah was wearing on the day of his disappearance. According to family information, the body was found in a fetal position, consistent with hasty burial or burial under minimal conditions, with no signs of wrapping cloth or specialized covering materials. The forensic team secured the scene, recorded initial measurements, and collected soil samples at various depths for later analysis. Upon completing documentation of the first body, the search team continued expanding the area southeastward, approximately 40 meters, following the initial K9 signals, and discovered a second site with similar characteristics: flattened surface, inconsistent compaction, and unnatural accumulation of leaf litter relative to its apparent age. The K9 again reacted strongly, and the same excavation procedure was repeated. Within just a few minutes, fragments of dark clothing and small leg bones appeared, confirming this as the second body, most likely Caleb. When the body was fully exposed, the contracted posture and degree of skeletal decomposition indicated a longer period of decomposition compared to the first body. Both bodies were sealed and transported to the state forensic facility for full examination. At the forensic lab, the medical examiner conducted analysis of bone structure, remaining tissue, and adhering soil samples to determine the relative time of death. Results showed that the two teenagers did not die at the same time. The body believed to be Caleb exhibited more advanced decomposition, consistent with death approximately 2 to 3 years prior to discovery, while Noah's body showed moderate decomposition corresponding to death approximately 1 to 2 years earlier. This aligned with the DNA test results and Evan's injury records, indicating that the detention process did not end simultaneously for all three victims. No sharp force injuries or high-impact trauma causing immediate death were found on the bones of either body. Instead, most signs pointed to prolonged emaciation, thinned bone structure, severe malnutrition indicators, and in Noah's case, evidence of progressive untreated bone infection. Several lower limb bones showed fatigue fractures or microcracks due to repetitive stress under conditions of calcium and vitamin D deficiency, similar to injuries previously observed on Evan's body. No direct binding marks were found on the bones, but both ankle and wrist areas retained residual skin scarring, consistent with prolonged restraint patterns observed in the bunker earlier. The forensic conclusion determined that the cause of death for both was emaciation combined with complications from infection and lack of medical care, completely ruling out natural accident or animal-related death. Environmental analysis also showed that both bodies exhibited traces consistent with the bunker conditions: prolonged lack of light exposure, mineral soil composition on bones matching the bunker floor, and complete absence of characteristics typical of individuals who had lived outdoors for extended periods. The discovery of the two bodies in close proximity to the detention bunker confirmed that the perpetrator was capable of short-distance body transport and shallow manual or small tool burial intended only for temporary concealment. The examination results reinforced the conclusion that Caleb and Noah died during prolonged detention without medical care, thereby establishing the grave criminal nature of the case and providing solid judicial grounds for the next phase of the investigation. Immediately after the detention bunker and the two bodies were discovered, the investigation team shifted focus to tracing the suspect through all evidence collected at the scene. First, the rectangular metal plate attached to the hatch frame bearing partially embossed markings was sent to the materials engineering lab. Compositional analysis revealed it to be a steel-aluminum alloy, a type commonly used in small renovation projects or homemade hatches from the 1990s, 2000s. The embossed characters, AHE 96, did not match any commercial product codes, leading the engineering team to suspect it was a personal mark or initials of the person who reinforced the hatch. When reviewing metal suppliers near the White Mountains, investigators found that only one hardware store in Bethlehem, New Hampshire, had sold metal plates of the same size and structure. Customer records from 2008 to 2016 were pulled, revealing only 5 individuals who purchased small quantities consistent with building an underground structure. Of these, only one had the surname Hale and lived within 15 kilometers of the North Kinsman area. Simultaneously, analysis of shoe impressions collected near the glove and drawstring site identified a tread pattern matching heavy-duty high-ankle work boots, size 11. 11.5, manufactured by a small Vermont company. This boot model was distributed to only 7 stores in New Hampshire, primarily serving mechanics or terrain workers. Aggregated sales data showed that in the past 10 years, only 23 pairs in size 11.5 had been sold in the 3 towns near Franconia Notch, Littleton, Lincoln, and Bethlehem. When cross-referenced with the metal purchase customer list, a single match emerged, an individual named Arthur Hale, who had purchased 2 pairs of the same boot model in 2013 and 2015. Tracing the wood materials used in the bunker provided another crucial layer of evidence. Dendrochronological analysis showed that most of the wood planks in the bunker were 25–30 years old, but several newer planks were only 6–8 years old, indicating periodic repairs. The newer planks had been cut with a saw blade bearing distinctive tooth marks, matching a tool sold exclusively at one store in Littleton. When investigators requested customer records for this saw blade type, Arthur Hale's name appeared again with 2 transactions 3 years apart. Additionally, empty food cans found in the bunker were traced via batch codes stamped on the bottoms, showing they were primarily distributed to 2 regional supermarket chains, one of which was located just minutes' drive from Hale's residence. Traffic camera footage, reviewed from the period 4 years earlier, when the teenagers went missing, was also analyzed. Using color, size, and body style recognition algorithms, technicians identified an old moss-green sport utility vehicle appearing multiple times on the road leading to Lafayette Place Campground from 3 months before to 2 months after the teenagers were last recorded. The vehicle was observed moving unusually slowly on a section without official pull-offs and occasionally appeared in early mornings or late afternoons on non-tourist days. License plate data was blurry due to old cameras, but still allowed identification of the last 3 characters. When cross-checked against vehicle registrations in the 3 counties near the White Mountains, only one vehicle matched the description, an older Ford Bronco owned by Arthur Hale. Based on the combined evidence, metal plate with initials matching the name, matching shoe size, wood materials from stores Hale frequented, food cans purchased near his home, and repeated vehicle sightings near the area where the teenagers disappeared. The behavioral analysis team began assessing whether this potential suspect fit the profile of a long-term abduction detainer. Public records showed Hale to be a single man with minimal social interaction, previously employed in mechanics with basic woodworking and metalworking experience. His home was in a remote area bordering the forest, about a 25-minute walk from lesser-known trails. Investigators also noted that Hale had virtually no social media presence, minimal financial transaction history, and spent most of his time in the forested area around his home, consistent with a suspect knowledgeable about terrain, familiar with unofficial trails, and capable of constructing an underground bunker in the woods. Neighbors described him as taciturn and solitary, but frequently carrying large backpacks into the forest and returning at irregular hours. When combining the behavioral profile with physical evidence, the investigation team concluded that Hale's movement patterns, consumption habits, personal skills, and residence location were all highly compatible with the perpetrator hypothesis. The convergence of 3 independent lines of evidence, materials, footwear impressions, and traffic data, all pointing to the same individual, prompted state police to officially designate Arthur Hale as the central suspect, request search and arrest warrants, and prepare to enter the direct investigation phase. After Arthur Hale was identified as the central suspect through the chain of physical evidence and behavioral analysis, state police immediately prepared the application for search and arrest warrants, submitting them to the New Hampshire State Court, along with all data collected from the scene, forensic reports, purchase history records, and evidence of his vehicle appearing near the trailhead during the period the three teenagers went missing. The warrants were approved early that morning, and the task force, in coordination with local police, proceeded to arrest Hale at his isolated wooded residence in Bethlehem. The arrest occurred without resistance. Hale displayed an unusually calm demeanor when asked to step out of his solitary wooden house and asked no questions about the reason for his arrest. Investigators immediately conducted a search of the house and surrounding area within the scope permitted by the court order. In the old garage, they found several rusted mechanical tools, including a saw blade type matching the cut marks on the bunker wood planks. In the storage area behind the house, additional metal plates, similar to those used for the hatch, were discovered, differing only in size, along with bolts matching those found in the bunker. Inside a wooden cabinet against the wall were two pairs of size 11.5 work boots with heavily worn terrain-gripping soles, perfectly consistent with the footprints found near the canine's last signal point. In the old kitchen, canned food containers were neatly stacked in boxes. Several remaining boxes bore batch codes identical to the empty cans found in the underground bunker, indicating Hale regularly purchased and used this type of food. Examination of the area surrounding the house revealed numerous signs of frequent forest entry. A small trail starting from the backyard, compacted soil, and cut marks on low-hanging branches, indicating the path had been used for many years. When checking purchase histories at regional hardware stores, additional records confirmed that Hale had not only bought metal plates, saw blades, and lumber, but also drawstrings, screws, and various items potentially used to maintain an enclosed structure. Invoices showed regular recurring purchases year after year, consistent with the assessment that the underground bunker had been periodically repaired and upgraded. After completing the initial search, Hale was transported to State Police Headquarters for interrogation. The first interview began with basic questions about his activities in the White Mountains area. But Hale consistently gave evasive answers, claiming he only hiked and hunted on a small scale and denying any contact with any teenagers. However, when investigators asked why items in his home matched evidence recovered from the bunker, Hale shifted to disjointed explanations, claiming many people in the area could use similar materials. Contradictions became evident when timelines were compared. Purchase receipts aligned with the period of the teenager's disappearance, yet Hale claimed he had not entered the forest during that time, due to health issues. Despite local medical records showing no related treatment, when investigators presented images of the Ford Bronco captured by traffic cameras, Hale insisted his vehicle rarely left the property, yet traffic sensor data showed that exact vehicle model appearing multiple times on the very road leading to Lafayette Place campground during the suspect period. The evasive, constantly shifting answers to each question led the team to compile a preliminary psychological assessment, concluding that Hale was deliberately offering alternative scenarios, lacking consistency. Meanwhile, forensic technicians quickly analyzed soil and fabric samples collected from Hale's residence and found multiple matches with the soil composition inside the bunker, as well as fibers consistent with those found near Caleb's body. When these results were presented during the next interview session, Hale remained silent for a prolonged period, neither denying nor confirming. Concurrently with the interrogation, Evan, though still in recovery, was asked to participate in an indirect identification process through photographs and descriptions. Upon viewing Hale's image, Evan exhibited a clearly intense stress response, increased breathing rate, trembling hands, and avoidance of direct eye contact. Based on prior psychological evaluations, this reaction was consistent with recognition of someone who had exercised control or induced prolonged fear. The psychologist noted that this was a reaction impossible to simulate, further strengthening the likelihood that Hale had direct contact with Evan in the detention environment. When weighing all collected evidence, purchase data, scene traces, and the victim's identification response, the investigation team determined that the connection between Hale and the underground bunker was strong enough to continue holding him in criminal custody on preliminary charges related to unlawful imprisonment and deprivation of liberty. Although Hale had not yet made any confession or specific admission, the contradictions in his statements combined with the large volume of matching physical evidence made him the primary suspect, and the investigation officially moved into the focused charging phase. After completing the initial interrogation and collecting a significant amount of physical evidence proving Arthur Hale's involvement, the State Police Behavioral Analysis Unit, together with experts from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, was deployed to conduct an in-depth assessment of his psychological profile, behavioral patterns, and criminal motives to support the next phase of charging. Hale's personal background shows multiple indicators of prolonged isolated personality traits. He has lived alone for more than 2 decades, maintains no family or social relationships, refuses to participate in community activities, and has been documented engaging in minor aggressive behavior toward neighbors, though not rising to the level of criminality. His medical records do not reflect any serious diagnosed pathology, but notes from his local physician describe him as uncooperative, abnormally withdrawn, and frequently exhibiting suspicion toward others. Psychological experts assess that Hale is highly likely to exhibit avoidant personality traits combined with a strong need for control, particularly when exercising power over individuals in weaker positions. His prolonged isolation, habit of living on the margins of society, and practical skills working with metal and wood tools enabled him to construct and maintain a detention space in the forest without detection. When analyzing the control pattern Hale applied to the teenagers, the expert team identified 3 characteristic structural layers. First, the reward-punishment mechanism, evidenced by uneven nutritional traces, psychological responses, and indirect statements from Evan showing that victim compliance was maintained by providing minimal food and punishing through reduced provisions or restricted movement. Second, group separation. Hale most likely deliberately divided the 3 teenagers into 2 or 3 independent detention phases to prevent mutual support or escape planning. This is reinforced by the different times of death of Caleb and Noah, indicating they did not die simultaneously and were likely held under dissimilar conditions or alternately isolated at different times. Third, creation of dependency. A psychological model based on complete control of survival resources, gradually conditioning the victims to view the perpetrator as their sole source of sustenance, resulting in the mixture of fear and submission that Evan displayed. The experts also examined the wall carvings, the placement of metal rings, and the cyclical changes in materials inside the bunker to evaluate the degree of detailed control Hale exercised. They concluded that Hale's behavior was not driven by impulsive or immediate aggression. Instead, he constructed a long-term captivity model in which the 3 teenagers were maintained as a miniature social unit under his absolute control. This aligns with the hypothesized motive. Hale sought to create a form of family of his own making to replace his loneliness and social disconnection with a group of individuals completely dependent on him. The arrangement of items in the bunker, single beds, sitting area, time-marking locations, along with the provision of only minimal nutrition, indicates that Hale did not aim for immediate extreme violence, but instead sustained the victims as part of the controlled living environment he dominated. This motive also explains the periodic bunker repairs and continued food provisioning over many years. When examining the causes of death of Caleb and Noah in greater depth, the behavioral experts, in coordination with forensic pathologists, determined that patterns of malnutrition and untreated infection were the direct result of selective neglect. This shows that at certain points, Hale reduced or ceased caring for the 2 teenagers when they became difficult to control, seriously ill, or no longer fit the dependency model he desired. In Caleb's case, earlier decomposition and long-term bone damage suggest he may have been isolated by Hale during the initial phase, leading to faster deterioration. For Noah, evidence of bone infection and unhealed injuries indicates Hale may have attempted to prolong the boy's life for a period, but failed to provide medical care when the condition became severe, resulting in death. The experts argue that this pattern reflects a possessive, rather than actively homicidal motive, Hale wanted absolute control over his victims. But when they no longer fit the role he assigned, death became the inevitable consequence of lack of care rather than direct violent action. This is consistent with other prolonged captivity cases where the perpetrator does not necessarily intend to kill, but creates a dependency environment in which any weakening on the perpetrator's part, in this case, reduced food supply or failure to treat illness, leads to death. Combining all psychological data, physical evidence, and Evans' indirect statements, the Behavioral Analysis Unit concludes that Hale's core motive was to maintain an isolated power structure in which the victims served as members of a forced family he created to fill his own social void. The sophisticated control model, repeated bunker repairs, and years-long victim maintenance constitute compelling evidence that Hale's behavior was planned, persistent, and consistent, thereby establishing a full psychological foundation for charges of long-term kidnapping resulting in death. After the behavioral analysis team completed its assessment of Arthur Hale's motives and crime patterns, the pretrial preparation phase was initiated, focusing on systematizing all evidence collected from the detention bunker, burial sites, the suspect's residence, and historical data related to the period when the three teenagers went missing. First, the forensic team compiled the DNA sequences obtained from the wooden bed, blanket, metal rings, compacted soil floor, and various items inside the bunker, identifying three distinct sources, one matching Evan 100%, the other two matching reference samples from the remains of Caleb and Noah. Additionally, mixed DNA traces consistent with Arthur Hale's profile were found on the surface of metal rings, new wooden planks, and several food cans. This trace evidence was cross-referenced with DNA from shoes, clothing, and tools recovered at Hale's residence to establish direct linkage. Next, positioning data was reconstructed from traffic camera systems, purchase histories, travel routes of the Ford Bronco, and GIS mapping, revealing a consistent pattern of Hale's movements to the area near the trailhead, before and after the three teenagers disappeared. All data was entered into event sequence analysis software to reconstruct the suspect's movements and actions across specific time points, from bunker construction, periodic repairs, to food delivery at different stages. To enhance visualization, State Police requested the Digital Forensics Unit to create a complete 3D reconstruction of the detention bunker based on crime scene photographs, measurements, and GPR mapping. The 3D model clearly shows the sealed structure, metal ring positions, wooden beds, ventilation points, and distance from the trapdoor to the floor, demonstrating that victims could not escape without external assistance. Simultaneously, simulated lighting conditions, humidity levels, and confined space helped reinforce the expert opinions of medical and psychological professionals when explaining Evan's injuries, as well as the deterioration leading to Caleb's and Noah's deaths. Once all evidence was digitized and systematized, the prosecution team began drafting the formal charging document with three main groups of offenses: kidnapping, false imprisonment, and murder. For Caleb and Noah, second-degree murder charges were drafted based on forensic conclusions that both died from lack of medical care, starvation, and infection while in captivity. For Evan, kidnapping and attempted murder charges were considered due to his survival after years of captivity. The prosecution also incorporated behavioral analyses to prove Hale's prolonged intent, including his control motive, reward, punishment model, and cyclical bunker repair behavior, demonstrating calculation rather than impulsive action. Next, a strategic witness and expert list was constructed, beginning with the crime scene team, describing the detention bunker and physical evidence, followed by the DNA expert, presenting matches from the three teenagers and Hale. Then forensic pathologists explaining the causes of death of Caleb and Noah, behavioral psychologists presenting the control model. And finally, Evan's limited statement, used in the form of audio recording or notes, to avoid further traumatizing him during trial. The prosecution team also developed a roadmap to counter potential defense arguments, particularly the possibility that Hale would deny building the bunker, claim others used similar materials, or invoke psychological reasons to reduce criminal responsibility. To address these, they included in the file separate purchase receipts for materials, transaction histories matching each repair phase, and satellite GPS data showing Hale's consistent travel patterns over many years. All evidence was linked into a logical chain. Shoe prints, wood material, metal plates, food cans, DNA. Bunker locates. Food cans. DNA, bunker locates. Body behavioral pattern, purchase record, vehicle movement. Evans' identification response. This chain was designed to be presented in court in a progressively strengthening structure of proof, ensuring no link is isolated or dependent on a single piece of evidence. At the conclusion of the preparation phase, Arthur Hale's charging package is considered complete, with physical evidence, witnesses, scientific analysis, and behavioral foundation fully synchronized, laying the groundwork for trial proceedings in accordance with due process of law. The trial of Arthur Hale began in early spring, nearly a year after all evidence had been systematized and the indictment file completed. The courtroom was packed, attended by the families of the three teenagers, representatives from the state police, forensic experts, and many local residents who had followed the case throughout the 4 years since the group went missing. The prosecution opened with a comprehensive summary of the criminal conduct, emphasizing the process by which the three teenagers were led off the trail, subjected to long-term captivity, and the consequences that led to the deaths of Caleb and Noah, while also recounting Evan's extraordinary survival under brutal conditions. The first piece of evidence presented to the court was a 3D reconstruction model of the holding bunker, reflecting every detail of its size, structure, humidity level, placement of metal rings, wooden bed, and ventilation points. The images clearly showed that this was not a natural space, but a man-made structure, constructed and maintained over many years. When the model rotated to the trapdoor section, the prosecution specifically highlighted the metal plate-bearing markings that matched materials recovered from the Hale residence, forming a strong link between the crime scene and the suspect. Next, the forensic team presented the matching DNA sequence. Skin, hair, and cell samples collected from the bed, metal rings, and blanket matched the genetic profiles of Evan, Caleb, and Noah. A fourth DNA sample, appearing in multiple locations throughout the bunker, matched Arthur Hale at 100%. The evidence analyst presented data on the metal plate, saw blade, boots, bolts, and food cans, all of which were traced back to stores where Hale was a frequent customer. The prosecution continued by presenting traffic camera footage showing a green Ford Bronco repeatedly appearing near the trailhead during the time frame of the three teenagers' disappearance, along with travel pattern analysis indicating the vehicle was present in the area near the underground bunker for many months afterward. When it came to the forensic expert's testimony, the pathologist described the causes of death for Caleb and Noah: prolonged emaciation, untreated bone infections, severe nutritional deficiency, and bone markings, indicating long-term restricted movement. These testimonies were delivered in scientific language, but had a powerful impact on the jury due to the extreme cruelty of the conditions the two teenagers endured. The forensic psychologist went on to explain the behavioral control model Hale had applied: reward, punishment mechanisms, enforced dependency, separation of the three teenagers to reduce resistance potential, along with psychological manifestations in Evan, reflecting prolonged conditioning. The prosecution emphasized that this pattern could not have emerged if the victims had merely encountered an accident or survived independently in natural conditions. When Evan, the sole surviving victim, took the stand, the courtroom fell completely silent. He wore a long-sleeved shirt, spoke in a soft and hesitant voice, and was only asked limited questions to avoid further trauma. Evan confirmed he could not see his captor's face for most of the time, but his panicked reaction, when previously shown Hale's photo, had been presented by the prosecution as indirect evidence of a deep psychological link between victim and controller. Evan recounted the feeling of being kept in a constantly cramped, cold, dark space and being forced to obey commands in order to receive food. Testimony sufficient for the jury to imagine the extreme harshness of the circumstances. When it was the defense's turn, their strategy focused on denying any direct connection between Hale and the holding bunker, arguing that the metal materials, boots, and saw blade were common products in the region and could be owned by anyone, while also claiming the camera footage was not clear enough to definitively identify the vehicle as Hale's. The defense also attempted to create doubt by suggesting Hale's DNA could have appeared in the bunker through indirect contact or environmental contamination. However, the prosecution swiftly countered by presenting a tightly linked chain of evidence: the marked metal plate tied to Hale's purchase records, the saw blade purchased by only one person in the area, at 2 times matching the bunker renovation period, the rare boot size with matching sole pattern, and Hale's DNA appearing precisely at the metal ring locations, places only the captor could have touched during binding and control. The prosecution stressed that no single element was sufficient on its own to convict, but when reassembled into an unbroken chain, they formed irrefutable proof of Hale's conduct. Regarding the argument that the bunker could have been built by someone else, the prosecution presented GPR data, the 3D model, and geological analysis showing the bunker had been repaired multiple times using materials Hale had purchased, while emphasizing that no witnesses or records existed of anyone else operating in the area for over a decade. After the final arguments, the prosecution declared that Hale had not only kidnapped the 3 teenagers, but also maintained a detention structure to serve his pathological need for psychological control, and that his deliberate neglect had directly caused the deaths of Caleb and Noah. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: Arthur Hale was guilty on all counts: kidnapping, false imprisonment, and second-degree murder for Caleb and Noah, plus attempted murder for Evan. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole, citing the prolonged brutality spanning many years, the irreparable consequences for the 2 deceased teenagers, and the permanent psychological damage to the survivor. When the sentence was announced, no one in the courtroom appeared surprised. The consensus among both the jury and the public reflected the extreme gravity of the crimes Hale had committed and the necessity of ensuring he would never have the opportunity to reoffend. After Arthur Hale's sentence of life without parole officially took effect, the focus of the entire support system shifted to assisting Evan Brooks, the sole surviving victim, in gradually reintegrating into the community and restoring his ability to function independently after nearly 4 years of captivity. In the first few months following the trial, Evan was transferred to a specialized recovery center for long-term captivity victims, where he was re-taught basic skills such as regulating daily rhythms, managing emotions, and engaging in physical exercise to improve muscle mass and bone density, which had significantly deteriorated. Therapists also developed a long-term psychological support program focusing on processing conditioned fear responses, reducing sudden panic attacks, and building skills to recognize personal boundaries in order to restore a sense of safety. Although progress was steady, Evan still faced moments of being triggered by loud noises, confined spaces, or darkness, elements tied to memories of the underground bunker where he had been held. His family adjusted the living environment to minimize triggers, avoiding bright lights or metal objects that produced sharp sounds, while closely coordinating with doctors to maintain a 24-month treatment regimen. Alongside Evan's recovery process, the White Mountains community and the families of the 2 deceased teenagers organized a large memorial service shortly after the trial, placing a small stone marker near the trailhead area as a reminder of the fragility of safety in wilderness environments and the tireless persistence of those who searched for answers over 4 years. Annually, on the anniversary of the 3 teenagers' disappearance, the families of Caleb and Noah, along with friends, organize a commemorative walk along a short section of the old bridle path, not to relive the pain, but to reaffirm the bond between them and the community that supported them throughout the investigation. Schools in the area also implemented trail safety education programs, raising awareness of risks and the importance of hiking in groups, turning the tragic story of the three teenagers into a practical lesson for future generations. The impact of the case extended far beyond the victims' families, profoundly affecting the entire White Mountains community. During the 4 years of disappearance and the intense months of investigation, residents lived with a vague sense of unease about an invisible threat in the forest. The discovery of the underground bunker, the 2 bodies, and the trial process finally provided the community with answers to its long-standing fear, even though the cost was far too high. Rangers at Franconia Notch State Park received additional training in identifying signs of human interference in missing persons cases, while the state police updated incident classification procedures to transfer files to criminal investigation earlier when unusual factors are present. Many local volunteer groups also formed search support teams to ensure no teenager enters the trails without safety monitoring. Socially, the case became a landmark in community awareness of the risks of crime in areas that seem completely natural and peaceful. Community-organized outdoor safety workshops attracted large numbers of participants, not only to honor the 3 teenagers, but also to maintain the necessary vigilance when engaging in outdoor activities. After Hale's sentence officially took effect and all related civil procedures were completed, the state police closed the case file, transferring it to archive status with the code resolved, no pending leads. However, for the families and those directly involved in the 4-year search, the case did not end with the verdict. It continues to exist in the practical changes they have adopted to better protect one another. Evan, after nearly a year of intensive therapy, began participating in some small community activities under specialist guidance, such as walking in crowded areas and attending social reintegration classes. Although he has not yet been able to return to school or work, he has gradually regained a sense of control over his life, something that seemed impossible when he was found in a state of near-total emaciation nearly 4 years earlier. Evan's recovery stands as the clearest testament that even after profound loss and severe trauma, the human capacity to rebuild life still exists and remains powerful, even in the darkest circumstances. The case concluded with widespread recognition that justice had been served, while simultaneously reminding everyone that the long-lasting consequences of crime never fully disappear. They merely change form as the community learns to move forward together and rebuild what has been lost. The story of the 3 teenagers who went missing in the White Mountains and the nearly 4-year journey to uncover the truth is not only an exceptionally serious criminal case, but also reflects the real risks present in modern American life, where outdoor activities, from hiking and camping to ecotourism, are increasingly popular and attract young people. Evan, being found in a state of extreme emaciation, bearing clear physical and psychological trauma, demonstrates that even though this country possesses an advanced search and rescue system, personal safety is never absolutely guaranteed when entering wilderness areas or uncontrolled environments. One particularly sobering detail is that Arthur Hale, a reclusive individual with no prior public criminal record, was able to secretly construct and maintain a large-scale holding bunker in the forest for years without anyone noticing. This reflects a reality in the United States. Vast privacy comes with surveillance gaps, and sometimes communities only discover dangerous behavior after tragedy has occurred. The lesson learned is that sharing one's route, when heading into the woods, hiking in groups, and always checking for unusual signs in the surrounding environment, are not mere formal advice. They are life-saving measures. The case also underscores the importance of building community reporting systems for suspicious behavior. Hale had for years carried large backpacks into the forest at unusual hours, but because no one considered the possibility of crime, that behavior was never reported. The final lesson, and perhaps the most important, comes from Evan's recovery journey. He not only survived, but also learn to reintegrate with the persistent support of family, the healthcare system, and the community. This conveys the message that in today's American society, where mental health issues are receiving increasing attention, proactively seeking help and not downplaying trauma is essential for healing and moving forward. Thank you for joining us on this journey through this haunting case. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any important real-life stories about safety and awareness in everyday life. See you in the next video, where we continue to explore cases that help communities become stronger and more alert to seemingly invisible dangers.